So Rabbi Golker is the Menachel and head of Kodesh at Hasmonean, and this is actually the second share that Rabbi Golker has given us at Ner this week. So thank you very much for giving us so much of the Rod's time at such a busy time of year. If anyone hasn't seen the source sheet link, it is in the chat, and Rabbi Golker said if anyone wants to ask questions, feel free to just take yourself off mute at any point during the share. And I'll now hand over to Rabbi Golker. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that invitation, for that introduction. I must say that it's incredibly impressive that after Rosh Hashanah, after a Tanis, that people are joining to listen to a shir. From my experience in school this morning, everyone is absolutely exhausted after Rosh Hashanah. And coupled with the fact that it was a Tanis today, and many people were fasting, it's very impressive that we're here together to share some Divrei Torah. The topic, as you can see from the handout, is survival strategies for the days of awe. We're now, into the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, and of course, this is what's on everybody's mind. I want to begin with a story. It's a remarkable story. It's a true story, and to be honest, if I wasn't personally involved with the story, I would question its veracity. But I can vouch for its truth because I really was involved in the story. So listen to this amazing story. I had the privilege for many years to learn with someone called Professor Lehman. Many of you knew him, unfortunately passed away some years ago. A very special man, very accomplished. He was the head of computing at Imperial College. There are laws in the world of IT called the Lehman laws. A very modest and unassuming person, but also a fabulously accomplished person as well. He built the first ever computer in Israel. He worked for NASA. A very accomplished and yet humble person. His wife, I'm sure, is known to many of you. She's we spoke to before Yontef, Chava Lehman. Her fame, she started Kisharon. So a very special couple. Anyway, I used to learn with Professor Lehman for many years, early in the morning, until he made Aliyah about 10 years ago or so, 15 years ago. Anyway, I was sitting at home one Friday morning, and there was a knock at the door. And this story goes back about 15, 20 years maybe, I forget exactly. There was a knock on the door, and the person at the door was a middle-aged man who was very vaguely familiar. I didn't fully recognize him, but when he introduced himself, I understood exactly who he was. His name was Benny Lehman, and he was the son of this Professor and Chava Lehman. And he looked concerned, a bit agitated, and he came inside and he told me what had happened. And it was a story which was bizarre beyond belief, really. He lives in Israel, and his sister, the daughter of Chava and Manny Lehman, Professor Lehman, who lives in America, was making a wedding in America. So Professor and Chava Lehman, an older couple, they, of course, were going to travel from London to New York. But Benny Lehman, this fellow who showed up in my house, he decided he doesn't see his parents that often. He travels, he comes, but he's going to come on a Monday. He'll spend a few days with his parents. And on the Thursday, he will accompany his older parents to go to America for the wedding of a grandchild's wedding, of his sister's daughter's wedding in America. Now, he lives in a certain area in Israel which is neighboring various Arab villages, and it's quite a dangerous area. And he happens to be in charge of security in this moshav. And that means that he carries a gun with him the entire time when he's at home. And when he travels to Yerushalayim for work, he keeps the gun in the car with him. He then takes it into work. He puts it straight away into a safe. And then when he leaves work, he takes the gun, he puts it back in his rucksack, and goes in the car back to where he lives, and he goes and he puts it, as soon as he gets home, he puts it in the safe at home. So the day arrives for the travel, And on that Monday morning, the day before, it was, you know what it's like before you travel, things seem to get more hectic than ever. And Benny Lehman was very busy at work. He gets home on that Sunday night later than normal because of his work commitments. When he gets home on that Sunday night, his kids, his wife want to spend time with him. He has 6 children, 2 of whom are special needs. And he's exhausted and emotional because he's going to be away now for a couple of weeks. He does something which he's never done before. The gun, which he keeps with him at all times, he had a rucksack, and there were lots of different compartments to the rucksack. He put the gun in the sort of the bottom compartment. He forgot to take the gun out and put it in the safe as he would normally do when he arrives home. And he's then busy and packing to go to England the next day. The next day he leaves early in the morning. He packs his bag. He takes the rucksack, which has the loaded gun in one of the compartments. He's not realizing that the gun is there. He uses that for his hand luggage to fly from Tel Aviv to New York, to Tel Aviv to London. He puts in the normal things in his hand luggage, some food for the journey, some reading material, and he goes to Ben Gurion Airport with his rucksack in his case. He checks in his case, and when it comes to security, he is going to security to try and board a flight at Ben Gurion Airport with a loaded gun in his hand luggage. And for reasons which he cannot understand until this day, he gets through security at Ben Gurion Airport. And this is post 9/11. He gets onto a plane. I forget which airline it was, but he gets onto the plane and he travels from Tel Aviv to London. He comes out at Heathrow Airport. He is oblivious to the fact that he has a loaded gun in his hand luggage. He goes through the gate which says nothing to declare. And he makes his way to Hendon, to his parents' house in Parkview Gardens, or is it Elms Crescent, around there, to visit his parents, Professor Manny and Chava Lehman. And he spends a few days with them, and Thursday arrives, and he then goes with his parents to Heathrow Airport, where he's then going to go the second leg of his journey off to New York. At Heathrow Airport, he checks in his case, and he goes to security. The gun is still there, but he's oblivious to it. He then goes to security, and then the lady at security is checking his hand luggage. She's opening the various compartments. She finds the compartments, and she pulls out a gun. And she has been trained for this day, for this moment, all her professional career. And she takes the gun out and puts it on the table in shock. She looks across at Benny Lehman, who's also in absolute shock. And she leaves the gun with the suspected terrorist to go and ask her manager what to do. She must have forgotten that part of the training. She comes back, and to cut a long story short, Benny Lehman is arrested. It was a total mistake, didn't remember, totally forgot that he had the gun there. And he's arrested. The policeman in charge realizes that it was a genuine mistake, but notwithstanding that, this is a very serious crime. And again, to cut a long story short, I was involved a little, and he'd come to me on the Friday morning because they've got a deliberation. What are they going to do? The parents, Professor Chava and Manny Lehman, have got their daughters making a wedding in America. If they don't catch that flight, it was a Thursday evening, they're going to miss the Shabbos Offeruf, and they're going to miss the wedding. I forget exactly the details, but they don't want to leave Benny. So Benny Lehman says, look, I'm a big boy. He's the father of 6 children already. And I'll take care of it. You go off to America. And they gave them my details. I was a chavrusa of Manny Lehman for many years. And he rocks up at my door the next day, Friday morning, and told me this story. So to cut a long story short, I was copied into a lot of the correspondence he got some legal defense. He was being prosecuted. He couldn't go back to Israel. He couldn't fly. And he was released on bail, but he had a court case pending. And I remember being once copied into one email where the junior barrister, he sort of assessed the case. but he sort of put his proposal, his sort of prediction of how the case and the strategy, etc., to the QC. There was a QC who was defending Benny Lehman. And the QC replied back and said that I agree with your strategy and your analysis of how to deal with this case, but the only thing I disagree with is that your final assessment, your guess is that he will get between 3 and 6 months in jail. I disagree. I think he'll get approximately 3 years. So can you imagine a man, Benny Lehman, in his mid to late 40s, he, through a sheer mistake, by leaving his gun, which again is second nature to him, it's like you and I would carry a tissue in our pocket, he carried this gun in his bag because of the area where he lived. Anyway, he's now got to stay in London and he's going to be taken to court to be prosecuted for the crime of trying to take a weapon onto an aircraft. Now, I mention this story because on the day of the trial, I'm driving in the car. Professor Lehman is sitting next to me. Benny Lehman is sitting behind with Chava Lehman. The four of us go to the court. And here is a man who's head of security of his mashav, who's, had a life experience. And yet, when we walked into the courtroom, I was standing next to him, and I parted with him at the door to go to the public gallery. And he went towards the dock. He turned to me and said, he was shaking like a leaf, and you could see he was white because he knew that there was so much at stake. He said, I wish I was as scared of the Rabbi Shalom during the Yom Neroim as I am right now of this judge. I wish I was as scared of the Rabbi Shalom during the Yom Neroim as I am right now of this judge. And I think of those words a lot during the Yom Neroim. For him, the fact that his fate was in somebody else's hands and so much was depending on the next few moments was very real. And really, that is the situation we are all in. The continuation of the story, I apologize, I'm not going to tell it to you now. It's a fabulous rest of the story, which is also as unbelievable as the first half of the story, but that is for another time. But I mention this to you, as I say, because I think it gives us a little bit of perspective as to the situation we find ourselves in. If you take a look at the first box on the sheet, famous Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. The Gemara says, Shleisha Sfarim Niftachim B'Rosh Hashanah. There are 3 books which are open on Rosh Hashanah. Echad Shel Rishonim Gemurim, one is of certified Rishonim. Ve'echad Shel Sadikim Gemurim. Ve'echad Shel Beinanim, and others, which is the average people, which is you and I. Tzadikim Gemurim Nechtovim V'Nechtovim La'alter L'chaim. Those who are Tzadikim Gemurim are assigned to life straight away. Rishonim Gemurim Nechtovim Nechtovim La'alter L'misa, they are assigned to death straight away. Beinanim Tuluyim V'Oimdim Rosh Hashanah V'Ad Yom HaKippurim. They are Tuluyim V'Oimdim, which we'll come back to that phrase in a second. They're sort of hanging in abeyance, and from Rosh Hashanah till Yom Kippur. Zochu Nichtovim L'chaim, if they merit, they'll be inscribed into the book of life. Lo Zochu Nichtovim L'misa, they'll be inscribed into the book of death. That phrase, that Tuluyim V'Oimdim, is quite troublesome, because it seems to contradict itself. You're either Tluyim, hanging, or you're Oimdim. You can't be both. Tluyim seems to be, you're hanging. And Oimdim means you're standing still. What does the Gemara mean? So the Baalei Musa explain it as follows. Tluyim v'Oimdim means, imagine, Rachman al-Islam, you have a person who's being hung, he's on the gallows. So whilst he's being prepared for his death, he stands on a stool and a noose is put around his neck. And he's standing on this stool. All the sheriff, the bailiff, or whatever has got to do is kick away the stool. So whilst he's standing on the stool, his tluyim, because the noose is around his neck, v'oimdim, he's standing on the stool. It's that combination. And in a way, we are all beinanim, and therefore that precarious situation we currently find ourselves in is exactly that of tluyim v'oimdim. It's exactly that. So if that is the case, then we need to think of some sort of strategies to try and extricate ourselves from this situation. So, as I've called it, the sheer survival strategies for the days of war, to consider some strategies, some ideas to make sure that this precarious situation we currently find ourselves in, teluyim va'omdim, how we try and get out of that situation, that we should fulfill the first half of the statement, Zachu nichtovim l'chaim, that if we merit, then we'll be inscribed into the book of life. What are the strategies? Well, let's share a few. We'll see how long we have and how many of them we can get through. The first strategy is, of course, borrowed from the machzor itself. We said it yesterday and we said it the day before. The machzor tells us in the very powerful and beautiful words of Nesana Toikef, at the very end we say, Tshuva, Tefillah, v'tzedakah, ma'avirin es roya ha'gazera. So let's just consider those three for a minute. What exactly do they mean? When it comes to tshuva, the Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva Perek Beis Halacha Tes, if you have a look, it's on the next box. Ein hatshuva v'lo kipurim mechaprim el al aveira sheben odin l'makom. When you investigate what is tshuva, you have to differentiate between tshuva, which is ben odin l'makom, and ben odin l'chavero. Those misdemeanors that we do, which are between us and God, and that which is between man and man. For averas between man and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for example, Chilul Shabbos, for example, eating something which is not kosher, that's only between man and Hashem. So the Rambam elsewhere explains that it's very straightforward to do tshuva. It's difficult, yet it's straightforward. There are three elements to tshuva. Number one, there is charota, there's genuine regret. Number two, there is vidui, one has to articulate, one has to express the actual crime, whether it's in Shemona Esra or when at any other time. And third of all, there is a kabbalah la'asid, there is a genuine undertaking to try not to do that again. You do those three things, then, as the Rambam says, they're straight away nimcholim. Then a person, his sins are wiped away. But averas between man and his fellow man, kagon hamakalel chavero, someone who cursed his friend, or goes low, or stole from him, or chiyotzi bohen, you can't get atonement for that until you ask that person for forgiveness. Even if you verbally upset somebody, then you have to actually ask. So that is tshuva. Those are the building blocks of tshuva, very straightforward. What is tefillah? Tshuva tefillah utzlaka ma'avines ra gezerah. It's a very interesting thing. We make reference to Chana a lot during Rosh Hashanah. In fact, the Gemara says that yesterday on Rosh Hashanah, when we daven Musaf, there are 9 brachas in the Shemona Esra. Normally a Shemona Esra has 18, now it's 19 brachas, but that is made up of the 3 opening brachas, the 3 closing brachas, and the 12, now 13 middle section. On Shabbos, there are 7 brachas in the Shemona Esra. There's only 1 middle section. On Rosh Hashanah, there is 9. So the Gemara says, why is there 9? So the Gemara explains, because Chana, in her Shirashana, the beautiful song which she sings in praise of Hashem after she's given a child, she mentions Hashem's name 9 times. And therefore, to draw on the merits of Chana, we daven 9 brachas in Shemona Esra. We lay in the Haftarah of Chana on the first day of Rosh Hashanah. What is the connection of Chana and Rosh Hashanah? Furthermore, when we begin Slichas, so towards the very beginning of Slichas, we say the following pasuk from Tehillim: Boyu nishtachaveh nichra v'nivracha lifnei Hashem Oseinu. Let us bow down, prostrate ourselves, and bend our knees to Hashem who made us. It's a pasuk in Tehillim. Of recent years, there's become popular to say something called Perek Shira. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. Perek Shira is a very beautiful, I think it's a midrashic source, where every single element of creation praises Hashem. from every single animal to aspects of the creation of trees and the stars and the moon, etc. Each one offers a different posuk. That posuk of Boyu Nishtach ve'Nivrach Nivrach is a posuk of the Kelev. In Perek Shira, the dog offers that praise, that particular posuk. So two questions. Why that posuk? And second question, why do we keep drawing on the, making reference to Chana on Rosh Hashanah? The answer I once heard from Pinchas Roberts is a beautiful answer. The Gemara says that a Kelev lives a very precarious life. A Kelev is always hungry, the Gemara says. He's always searching for food. A Kelev lives a volatile and very precarious life, and it's put in the beginning of Slichas to remind us of the very fragile, volatile existence we are all living. Chana as well. Chana, she had a very difficult life. Her co-wife, her tzara, Penina, had many children, she had none. But when she davened with sincerity, and in fact all the halachas of tefillah learned from her, there was a turnaround. And in fact, if you look at Shirashana, the theme of Shirashana is how volatile life is, how fragile life is. Hashem moirish u'ma'ashe, meimes u'machaya. It's studying contrasts, that there's a turnaround. Those who were hungry are no longer hungry, etc., etc. And it's the contrast. The message of Chana, the message of the Kelev, is that in the Aseret Me'Tshuvan and Rosh Hashanah, we should realize that life is very precarious. You know, yesterday, the last couple of days, for Musaf, I davened in the street minyan. Like I was asking in school today, some of the boys, some of the girls, where do they daven? Everyone was giving me addresses. I davened in Queen's Gardens, I davened in Mayfield, I davened in Parkview Gardens. Everyone's davening in the streets. A very bizarre Rosh Hashanah. So I was in Woodlands, and before Tkiyah Shofar, I was asked to say a few words. So I mentioned this question of the Kelev and I mentioned the question of Chana, why reference Chana? And I explained that it's meant to remind us how fragile and volatile life is. And I said, yet last year, if I would have said the same idea, then people would perhaps struggle a little bit more to internalize that message. But this year, when you're davening Musaf Rosh Hashanah in the street, on the way to shul, I came to shul and I was wearing my kittel and my talis and my white couple, and I suddenly left my front door, and I thought to myself, I don't feel so comfortable to walk in the street where, even though I'm not going out of the Woodlands, I'm going in Woodlands, but I don't feel so comfortable to wear my talis in the street. So I thought maybe I'll get my coat on, even though it was very warm. But then I think to myself, well, in 5 minutes' time, I'm going to be singing in the street in my talis. What a bizarre situation we're in. So if ever there was a year to realize how volatile and fragile life is, this is the year, certainly. So tefillah is the antidote to that. Why? I'll explain what I mean. There is a very powerful idea that I heard in the name of Rabbi Zion Brook. Rabbi Zion Brook was the Rosh Hashiva of Nevardok. He's no longer alive, but he makes the following very interesting points. On Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol goes into the Kodesh Kedoshim. Now, think about that. The Kohen Gadol, the holiest man in the Jewish people, on the holiest day of the year, goes into the holiest point in the whole world. If ever there was an auspicious time to pray, there's the time. So says the Gemara, he goes in and he prays. Says the Gemara, my matzli, what does he actually daven? What is his tefillah? So the Gemara gives 4 things that he davens for. Very short, tefillah katzara, the Mishnah calls it. One of the things is that he doesn't listen to that HaKadosh Baruch Hu shouldn't listen to the ovrei derech, to the wayfarer, the traveler. That's a bizarre thing to pray for. What on earth does that mean? That Hashem shouldn't listen to the tefillah saderech of the wayfarer? It seems almost like a waste of a tefillah. So Rabbi Brook gives the following explanation. A wayfarer, a traveler today, a businessman, he goes on a business trip. So what does he do? He gets in the car, he drives up the M1, he gets on a train, he gets on a plane. As tiresome and exhausting as business travel may be, it's bearable, it's not terrible. He can stop at a service station, buy a coffee. On a train, he can read the paper, read a book, read a sefer. He can listen to music. It's bearable. But the traveler in the times of Chazal, it was a totally different experience. He was taking his life in his hands. If he had to go to a neighboring country to buy some goods and stock, he was traveling through uncharted territories. He was going through fields and wilderness and rivers. He was exposed to the elements. He would take there was no internet banking. He would take his money purse, which made him fair game for bandits and pirates. So when he said his tefillas haderech, and he said to Hashem, don't let it rain because I've got to travel rivers, I've got to go through fields, and if it rains, my life is in danger, that was a genuine tefillah. It was such a sincere, heartfelt tefillah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would listen to that. Now, whilst it may be good for the traveler, it wouldn't be good for the rest of the country, because if he davens there should be no rain for the next 3 days, that's bad for everybody else. So therefore, the only way to counter the sincere, heartfelt prayer of the wayfarer, of the traveler, was that the Kohen Gadol, on Yom Kippur, in the Kodesh Kadoshim, would have to implore Hashem, please don't listen to the tefillah of the traveler. Because the prayer of a heartfelt, sincere person counts. And therefore, that is really what we refer to when we talk about tefillah. The more a person realizes how fragile and volatile life is, the more sincere and heartfelt his prayer will be. And that is a tefillah that works. Okay. The third idea is that of tzedakah. What is tzedakah? Well, tzedakah is something which we're very familiar with. The tzedakah, it's a difficult challenge, but it's something which again is so powerful. The Arizal says something very interesting. He says that in the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, there are basically 7 days, apart from the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, there are 7 days. Each of those days, today, a Monday, a person should behave on a Monday, he should behave in such a way that it repairs, it's masakein, all the other Mondays of the year. When a person behaves on a Tuesday, that's meant to be masakein all the other days all the other Tuesdays in the year. And some people said the result fast. They fast on that during the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, like we did today, but they do it every day of the Aseret Yemei Tshuva. And they do so because that's meant to atone for all those days of the year. The Gemara says in Brachas Tavov that the purpose, the function of a tanis, amazingly, is tzedakah. What's tzedakah got to do with a tanis? So the Gemara explains that on a tanis, the poor person goes round at mincha time or whatever to collect the money. Says the Gemara, the whole purpose, the whole function, the whole benefit of a fast day, nothing to do with the fasting, is that a person will be a bit more humble and more inclined to give tzedakah, and therefore the tzedakah is really the high point and the purpose, the objective of a fast day. Astonishing, because tzedakah is so powerful that it can literally be korea gzar din. So there we have it, three, what we said yesterday, tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah, ma'avirin, esroya ha'gezeira. Now, let's move on to other strategies. Another strategy is ish tzibur. I'll explain what that means. Ish tzibur. When we daven on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we use the phrase, the word uvechein, many times. Uvechein tzadikim, uvechein tein pachtecha, etc., etc. Where does this phrase uvechein come from? So there's a well-known Avudraham. The Avudraham says that the word uvechein is borrowed from Megillas Esther. When Esther Hamalka went into Achashverosh, the pasuk says uvechein ovay el hamelech. She went into the king. And just like we are approaching the Melech Malchei Hamlochim on Rosh Hashanah and during the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, well, so too like she approached Achashverosh, we are approaching the King of Kings. The question I saw in the writings of Rabbi Emanuel Bernstein, who's got a wonderful sefer on Tshuva, he says the following. There are hundreds of occasions where somebody goes into the Melech on Rosh Hashanah. Think about it. Every time, in Tanakh, hundreds of occasions where someone is going into a melech in Tanakh. Every time Moshe and Aaron went into Paro, that's someone going into in front of a melech. So why, of all the hundreds, if perhaps thousands of examples of where there was a dialogue between a regular person and a king, why do we refer specifically to Esther going in front of Achashverosh? So the following explanation was given. When Esther went into Achashverosh, she said, Sumu olai v'tsumu aleichem. You fast for me, Mordechai. You get the whole of the Jewish people to fast for me, and I will fast, and together, on the back of the koach of the tzibur, I will go in and risk my life to go into Achashverosh. The reason why we specifically refer to Esther going into Achashverosh is because she is not just going in front of a melech. She's going with the koach of the tzibur. And when we daven on Rosh Hashanah, we should try and invoke that koach of the tzibur, because you can do things as a tzibur, as a community, that you can't necessarily do as an individual. I'll tell you a story which brings out this point better than I can possibly explain. I don't think this story is true, but like Beryl Wine says, that all my stories are true, it's just that some of them haven't happened yet. So this is the story. There was a young man, there was an exam hall, and the invigilator stood up at the beginning of the exam, and he says, boys, you have 2 hours to do this paper. I will give you half an hour's warning and then 10 minutes warning. And then at 2 hours, I will tell you to put your pens down. Any boy who's still writing after 2 hours, their paper is automatically disqualified. You may begin, good luck. Everyone starts writing. Half an hour after 90 minutes, he gives them half an hour warning. 20 minutes later, he gives a 10-minute warning. And then at 2 hours, he tells everyone, please put your pens down. Everyone puts their pens down, apart from one boy at the back who continues scribbling. He's writing away. So much so that he carries on writing for almost half an hour, by which time the only people left in the exam room are the invigilator and this young man at the back. And the invigilator is piling up his papers, all the exam papers, putting them in this big pile. And then eventually this young man at the back finishes, puts his pen down, and very casually, nonchalantly, he walks from the back of the exam hall towards the front. He comes up to the invigilator and says, here's my paper. So the invigilator says to him, you heard me loud and clear. Any boy who continues writing after 2 hours, his paper is disqualified. So the young man sort of squares up, he puffs out his chest, looks at the invigilator and says, do you know who I am? The invigilator said, I don't know who you are. I don't care who you are. I'm not accepting your paper. The kid looks at the invigilator and says, do you know my name? And the invigilator said, no, I don't know your name. Whereupon the kid takes the paper, thrusts it in the middle of the pile of the invigilator with all the other exam papers, looks at him and says, good, and then runs out. A famous story. Doubtful if it ever happens. But the point of the story is very powerful and very true. You can sometimes get away with something as a tzibur that you couldn't as an individual. And that's really what we should be focusing on during the Aseret Simei Tshuva. The tzibur punches above its weight. Sometimes we can't bear the scrutiny of sort of where the spotlight is on us as an individual. In fact, when Elisha came to the Shunamis, the Chazal say it was Rosh Hashanah, and Elisha says to the Shunamis, let me intercede on your behalf. What can I pray to Hashem on your behalf? And she says something which is astonishing. Can you imagine? You've got the Novi Hashem offering to pray for you on Rosh Hashanah. People fly all over the world to get brachas, davener kvarim today in the 21st century. But you can go to a Novi Hashem and he can daven for you. So what is her response? Her response is, B'toich ami ani yosheves. No, thank you. I just want to be reckoned as part of my people. I don't want to be singled out. I can't bear the scrutiny of the spotlights. When a rainbow appears, sometimes it's Midas Hadin. What is Midas Hadin? Midas Hadin is when you've got a raindrop and the light is shining through that prism, it refracts into 7 different colors. Because Midas Hadin shines a spotlight, it breaks down a person's behavior into such detail that he can't always bear the scrutiny of that analysis. I prefer that. So another strategy, another eitzah, is to be an ish tzibur, to be somehow to attach yourself to the community. What can I do for my shul, for my community, for my school, for my organization, whatever it may be. The gematria of tzibur is 298, which is the same gematria as rachamim. That's another strategy. Let's move on to a further strategy, and perhaps the last one. David HaMelech says that in the Pasuk in Tehillim, I'm now on the first page of the handout, paragraph 4a. The Pasuk in Tehillim says, Torah's Hashem tamima mashivas nefesh. Torah is perfect, it's restorative. And Torah is nechemod mizahov umepazrov. Torah is more precious than gold and more than fine gold. Umesukim midvash v'noifes sufim. It's sweeter than honey and drippings of honeycombs. What exactly is the analogy? What does it mean Torah is sweeter than honey and the drippings of honeycombs? So I came across a remarkable insight from someone called Rabbi Benjamin Yudin. Rabbi Benjamin Yudin is a well-known Rav in America. He just retired after 50 odd years. He's famous for doing a broadcast every Friday morning on the radio stations in America. I think there are 50,000 people who listen to him every week. He's just retired. He's for those who know Ruthie Garbaz married his son, Gotch Yudin. So anyway, Rabbi Benjamin Yudin is a very well-known Rav in America, and he makes the following insight. There is a very fascinating Rosh. The Rosh, in the name of the Rabbeinu Yonah, says this. When you make honey, we've all consumed quite a bit of honey over the last couple of days. When you make honey, what happens if you find a little part of the bee in the honey? Does that trafe it all up? So the Rosh, citing the Rabbeinu Yonah in Brachas, says that it doesn't. That honey is so sweet that it can transform the issa, which is part of the bee, into something which is kosher. Part of the bee, but not all of the bee. Says Rabbi Benjamin Yudin that Torah is mesukim midvash. It's even sweeter than honey because it can transform not just the part, but the whole person. You see that Torah, the limud Torah, is transformative, not just partially, but it can transform the entire being. And perhaps that's what David HaMelech meant when he said that Torah is mesukim midvash v'noifetz sufim. Now, Torah is transformative, and that's borne out by a famous question of Rabbi Chanan. There isn't time to do it inside. It's getting late already. But it's the top of the second page of the handout. It's a very famous and fabulous essay by Elchanan Wasserman. Elchanan Wasserman was martyred in the Second World War. He was the prime disciple, the Talmud Muvuk of the Chofetz Chaim. In 1925, when the Chofetz Chaim wanted very much to go live in Israel, this is 8 years before he passed away, the delegation of Rabbonim came to him to implore him not to go, not to leave Europe. And he said, what's the problem? He said, well, we can't be leaderless. So he said, but I'm leaving behind Rabbi Chanan, what's the problem? Rabbi Chanan Wasserman was the Talmud Muvuk. When he came to America, Rabbi Chanan, in 1937, 1938, to collect money for his yeshiva in Baranovich. And Europe was burning. And they begged him to stay in America. They'll give him a position, he'll start a yeshiva. And he said, Captain doesn't abandon ship. And there's a very poignant photo of him in 1938 or even 39, of him on the deck of a ship. You see it from a distance and he's going back to Europe. That's the last known photo we have of him. And he died in 1940 or 41. He was killed by Lithuanian thugs. They shot him and many others. It wasn't even by the Nazis. But one of the giants of the 20th century. In one of his famous books, Kovetz Ma'amorim, Rabbi Chanan says the following. It's well known that Yaakov Avinu spent the night fighting the Malach, the Saad that Rashi identifies as Samuel, which is the Yetzer Hara. And he spent the whole night fighting and battling with him, etc. I'll ask Rabbi Chanan a very interesting question. Why didn't the Yetzer Hara start up with Avraham? Why didn't he start up with Yitzchak? Why did he start with Yaakov? So the Chanan gives the following mashal. For those of you who remember your First World War history, when I talk to the boys in school, it's fresh for some of them. When you study trench warfare, imagine you've got the British, the French, they're on one side, they make an attack. So they'll progress 50 meters, 50 yards. And they've won that day's battle, that week's battle. But then perhaps the following week, there'll be a counterattack and they'll have to retreat 10 yards. That can go on for a long time, as it did. But when is the battle over? The battle is over when you disarm the other side. If you take away the enemy's arms, his rifles and ammunition, then it's over. There's nothing to do anymore. The Malach knew that Torah is the greatest weapon we have against the Yetzer Hara. Barasi Torah Tavlin, Barasi Yetzer Hara, Barasi Torah Tavlin, the Gemara says in Kiddushin. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the Yetzer Hara, but Torah is the antidote to it. It's no good taking other medicine because this is the medicine against it. Avraham represents Chesed. Yitzchak represents Gevurah, which is Tefillah. Yaakov is Ish Emes, which represents Torah. The Malach of the Yetzer Hara came. He said, I can live with the Chesed of Avraham. I can even live with the Tefillah of Yitzchak and the Gevurah. But I've got to engage in battle with Yaakov because I want to disarm him. I want to take away his ammunition. That's the Sultan knew how powerful the Yetzer, the Torah is in combating the Yetzer Hara. So it's late already, but what we've discussed this evening is survival strategies for the days of war. Of course, there are many others. I have a sefer at home called Eitzas Lezakas Bedin. Exactly that, survival strategies for the days of war, where he goes through several dozens, many dozen. But we've discussed 5. Shuvah, Tefillah, and Tzedakah. That's what the short, tried and tested way, which those elements are Ma'avir Nesra HaGazera. We also discussed the power of being an Ish Tzibur, of being a person, the power of the Klal. To the extent that we attach ourselves to the community, we latch on to the Zuchus of the Tzibur. And lastly, we discussed the importance of Torah, of Limut HaTorah, of attending Shiurim. Like I said at the outset, to come on to attend a Zoom Shir in the evening after 2 days of Rosh Hashanah where everyone is exhausted, and today is a fast day, many of us fasted. It's very impressive that people can attend a Shir by Zoom especially, straight after Rosh Hashanah and Tzom Gedalia. But Torah is powerful, as Rabbi Chanan says, it is the antidote to the Yetzer Hara. And these survival strategies, please God, they should stand us in good stead, that together with the rest of Klal Yisrael, we should be Zocher to a Gemar Chasima Tova. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Golker, for equipping us with those strategies. If does anyone have any questions before we wrap up? Feel free to take yourself off mute if you do. Okay, well.
I got off lightly. Good.
Yeah, I'll take that as an over. Thank you very much. We didn't think we'd manage to have a share next week after the Yom Kippur, so we will be back, please God, on Chol Hamoed Sukkot with a share by Diane Simons. Thank you very much again, Rabbi Golker.
Thank you. It was excellent.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Night.